How are you, Alicia?
I'm well. Here we are.
Here we are. Here we are indeed. Speaking to what I can guess is thousands.
Mystery audience.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course. Mm,
And I guess I should say too, if people are tuning in and watching, if you want to throw questions to us, please feel free. Otherwise, we're just going to have a chat, really.
Yeah, that's all this is. Very good chat too, and a nice easy chat.
Do you want to introduce yourself first, Jordan?
I'd love, yeah, always. My name, always. My name is Jordan, Jordan Shea. I am coming at the moment broadcasting on the Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and I want to just pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and the fact that we as a country have an extraordinarily long way to go in terms of reconciliation and any kind of bridging the gap between the first people of this country, who are the traditional and real owners. I'm a Filipino Australian, first generation Asian Australian, playwright and teacher, currently one of the Philip Parsons Fellows at the Belvoir Theatre. And this event is called Write What You Know, I believe.
With who you know.
Write what you know with who you know. That's right. Oh, I like that. All right. Yeah, that's all from me. What about not all from me, but what about you?
Yeah, hopefully we've got a bit more to fill an hour, right?
Yeah. Chat, yeah.
Yeah, so you can see on the screen my name's Alicia Herman and I'm from South Australia. Usually I live and work from Glossop, which is a little town in the Riverland region just near the Victorian border, which is on River Murray and Mallee people country. But today I'm actually coming to you from my car and it's pouring with rain, so hopefully it's not going to get too loud. And I'm just outside of a little town called Balaclava, which is on sort of the border of Ghana and Paramount country. So yeah, and just like Jordan, we're all, we're living on country that has really complicated histories, and we all have to wrestle with what that means for us and how we live and work and walk on this land. And I'm really personally grateful for the incredible and exceptional First Nations mentors and allies and friends and colleagues that I have in my life who continue to teach me and learn with me and open doors for me and sit beside me. Really grateful for that. And obviously all of you who are hopefully watching are all coming to us from other parts of the country as well.
All over the country.
Yeah. Oh, I was supposed to say what I do as well, wasn't I? Really nailing the intro. So I live and work in regional Australia, obviously. My primary practice is as a writer, but of all sorts of different things. So poems, plays, screen-based media, digital stuff, blogs, all sorts of things. But I'm also a theatre maker. So a lot of my work has a performance base or a performance eye to it, even when it's not written or made for performance. And that's a big part of what I do. And the last few years, I've also been working as a creative producer, supporting young people. That's something that I'm really passionate about. I have a background. I was a high school dropout at 15 and a teenager at 17. And I actually thought that arts was a complete waste of government money. And I accidentally got involved in a youth theatre project when I was 19 that completely and utterly transformed my life. So I'm really committed to doing everything I can to create those spaces for other young people now. I'm now 35. But yeah.
It's important though, isn't it? With because I'm a school teacher and I teach drama and English, and it is really important to gauge that sense of the fact that the arts is a place where you can work and you can hopefully survive as well. I don't think it ever crossed my mind when I was a teenager. Like, I'm 27 now, so I never really understood what it meant to work in the arts until I got there, So yeah, and that's so important.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and then it doesn't have to look like one single thing, right? So sometimes there's this idea held up of like, oh, this is the arts life and it's really hard and you won't be able to make it. But that's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
one version of what it can be. And there's, there's no wrong or right way. There's the pathway each of us find. And
that's right.
you're allowed to make it your own.
That's right. And it can be performative based or, media, multimedia is great, or visual arts or that sort of thing, It's so important to know that the path that you take is, for young people that are listening to this, success is really dangerous as an idea in the arts. I think goals are the real, the goals for me is what makes a good artist.
Yeah,
if you can get up, I know that's not what this is about, but if you can get up and write 3 pages in a day, I think that's great. If you can just generate something.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I actually reckon we should look back to this conversation about success in the context of community.
Yeah.
I'm interested, and feel free to interrupt me. All my lights are turning off.
The ones behind you are on.
Yeah, I've got stars. I've got the battery operated stars. So Jordan, when you're thinking about, just for the audience's benefit too, we don't know each other. We've never met. We had a 2-minute conversation just before this started. So we're totally getting to know each other just with an audience, really. I'm interested when you think about writing with or for or about your community. What does that mean for you?
Well, it took me a long time to actually understand what it meant because I'm biracial. So my father is a 6th-generation Australian of convict descent, chains on the ankles and that sort of thing. Real. I did the ancestry DNA thing recently, and I found out that it's real. It's real convict stuff. So I grew up in a very, very Caucasian neighborhood in the south of Sydney called Cronulla, which is famous for the riots. That's all it's famous for. For me, writing about my culture and my community didn't actually come until I was a little older. So until I finished VCA, so I went to VCA, and it kind of unlocked for me a lot of hidden traumas and understanding about my culture that I really wanted to write about and about my community. So for me, writing about community is like a continually engaging and ongoing practice, because my practice is really based about writing, first-generation Asian Australian experiences that really interrogate why this country is the way it is from a political, economic and social level, and really looking at those diasporic connections from the Philippines to Australia, because we're such a shared history and 2 shared countries as well. Yeah. So for me, it's a continually engaging process. And the one thing I've learned about, writing, with who, I've been able to tag with a really, really great mentor named Kenneth Moraleda. He's a director. He was in my last show at Belvoir. Really, really great actor and director. And we're collaborating a lot. And he pulls me up on a lot of things. Yeah. So because, I'm half white, but living in this country as a biracial person, you can be conditioned to become inherently whiter than what you are. And therefore, you're essentially colonized. So it's about the practice of decolonizing yourself in a way that makes you want to write and want to engage more with community. So for me, I've only been doing it the past 3 or 4 years. And I have no regrets coming to it late. But I do, you talk about the youth, the youth are now encouraged to write to the community. Do you know what I mean? They're encouraged to pick it up, whatever community that may be. And what about yourself? What communities do you work with? How do you collaborate? What's your work? What do you really do? What are you interested in?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question, isn't it? The ways that we think about which communities we're part of and which communities we become part of, which communities we're born into, and all those little layers of it. So interesting. A big part for me of the communities that I work with and that I'm also part of is a regional communities and a regional experience. I've spent a very brief, two very brief stints in Adelaide and a year in Ballarat. But other than that, well, Ballarat's technically like a regional place, but other than that, I've always lived in small communities, including a number of years as a kid when my family moved around on sheep stations. My dad was a wool classer and a presser, and my family lived in a caravan.
Wow.
So we were on sheep stations in the like middle of nowhere. Like there was no one else. And often it was only my brothers and I. So that experience of place and landscape and how that informs how I think is really significant in everything I do, but also how that experience, I guess, of isolation, like a geographical isolation, and the experience of then being in smaller communities where there's, a couple of thousand people maybe, which is a very different experience to, working or living in Adelaide, which I did for a couple of years. So I've worked with lots of other kinds of communities as well, and have worked in urban settings, but I always come back to regional communities and regional stories. And for me, it's a little bit of some of the, a different entry point, but a similar conversation about what it means to wrestle with some of that stuff, both in terms of a historical context and a modern context, but also what it means in terms of representation. So a lot of the stories that get told about the regions get told by people outside of the regions.
Yeah.
And they are often like very reliant on stereotypes. It's actually only in the last 5 years that I have gone to see a play that I felt represented my experience as a regional person.
And what was that? What was that play? Can you tell us?
It was a play by Claire Christian, who I absolutely adore, called Lysa and the Freeborn Dames. And I was sitting in the front row, and I basically just started crying through the whole thing, because it was such a bodily experience of going, this is a story that is real for me on stage. It wasn't my exact lived experience, but it very much felt like that moment of representation, and I just sobbed the whole way through.
And you saw yourself though, right? Like that.
I saw myself. I saw people. I saw people that I loved, people that I loved, treated with clarity and respect and realness, without kind of like romanticizing either. And I just had never seen that before, and because I'd never seen it before, it was so powerful.
Did you also, like, one of the big things when you see a community on stage, if I don't mind asking, Alicia, is how it's important to see a community's flaws.
Yes.
As well. Like, really important to see a community's flaws, because no community is perfect. No community is the most gorgeous, loving, welcoming community.
100%.
Like, this is really weird, but I was watching The Truman Show last night. Tim Carrey, The Truman Show, and everything in that little Sea Haven town is perfect, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's so perfect, but he just hates it. It really grinds him. So the thing that I ask for you is that why is it important for our communities to be having flaws in front of us in performance spaces,
Yeah. Oh, that's such a great question. And it's something like with my collaborators and collaborators who identify as artists and collaborators who don't identify as artists, we talk about this a lot, right? So what does it mean to tell our community stories, whether that's on stage or in a blog or whatever, like whatever form it is, to do so in a way that is, we want to represent, we want to represent ourselves in positive ways. Of course we do. We don't really slag in our community. But also we want to talk about the things that are not working, because that's kind of the point, is how do we use these conversations to open up bigger dialogues? And that means we need to talk about the stuff that's broken or toxic or not working, and finding that the way to do that and the way to enter that. And I think, and this might be also true in your experience, but in a regional context where everyone knows everybody, the fallout, if you get that wrong, is massive. So the sensitivity around how do we tell these stories while still addressing what's fucked up takes a lot of care, I think.
Yeah, and care depends, like that what sense of care will come. I know I've made mistakes as well when I was writing early pieces. My most recent play was a play called Kasama Kita, which was a play about the first Filipino nurses to come to Sydney in the 1970s. And the play was set between 1974 and 2019, and it played at the downstairs Belvoir Theatre. And for me, the thing that I was very aware of is that I live in Sydney. I live in the inner city. I grew up in the southern suburbs. I never grew up in an area where there were large amounts of Filipino people. Do you know, like I never grew up in where, you know, southwest Western Sydney. I didn't grow up there. So I'm really aware that I'm telling a lot of stories that would maybe be seen as like a city kind of Filipino, or like a, you know, a real kind of insular way of life. And it's really only recently, when I've collaborated with more people, have I started to see how important it is to approach these things with a sense of care. And what's the most correct thing you can do is get people in the room from the different parts of the community as well, you know, like, and get that consultation. That's really important.
And how do you approach that? Like, what's your process for doing that? Because I think that's the thing people listening might go, oh, but how? Like, how do I get?
Well, research is the biggest thing, and research is really broad. Like, I think there's a really there's two for me, because I come from two distinct cultures. There's two very distinct ways or pedagogies of research practices there. And one of the things is research might be, if you want to go to the state library and look up the archives, go to the state library. It's like a pretty Caucasian way of thinking for me, like, is to sit down with a bunch of old books and be like, wow, look. No, but you know, it's a very, you could do that in a day, right? Like, you get the facts, that's it, it's there. Whereas the Filipino side of consultation or research for me is really, really based on oral storytelling. So sitting down with my titas and titos and going over, and that's aunties, uncles, and really unpacking oral storytelling through food. We're a very nostalgic, very reflective community. So I really love that can kind of come quite easy, very blessed to have that. But you have to be a bit brave, and you have to protect yourself as well. So going with your gut and being like, if this doesn't feel like it's the right way to approach it, then it probably isn't. Or you need to, you need to go about. This is an example. I haven't done this, but if you're writing a trans character, or you're writing a character that's beyond your cultural experience, right? And you see it, like you see it these days, so many people are doing that. I really feel that you either don't do it, or you really, really, really choose to invest in that. And taking marginalized people on as consultants also has ramifications. So the idea of planning and research just isn't something that's done in a day. I believe it's something that really needs to be, you know, if you're writing a grant, and I've gotten a few, but nearly not as many as some people, where I specifically put in the grant, I want to use this time, or I want to use this residency to research or to write the play. Angus Serini, who wrote The Bleeding Tree, the biggest thing he said to me when he was mentoring me at ATYP, he said, tell them you want the grant or the residency to research or write. And that's always hit with me. That's always like resonated with me. So I think it's about taking time and really protecting yourself. You know, and I think that's it. What about you? How do you go about, what's your practice? How do you research, and what are your rules for that kind of collaboration?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting in terms of working with different, both individuals and cohorts, and like parts of the community, because they need and want different things from you. And I always feel like when I'm working with a community as a writer, first of all, it's not about me, and it's not about the story that I want to tell in that context. There are times when I'm there to tell a story I want to tell, but when I'm working with my community and writing on behalf of and in collaboration and with my community, it's about the story that they want to tell, and finding the way in and the framework that will make sure that they feel safe and taken care of in that. and that there's shared ownership as well. So for me, some of it's about having, I'm a really big fan too of like slow practice, like not rushing things and building relationships over like many years. So
Definitely.
we might start talking about something really, really like early, and we build relationship first. So the first thing is that I trust you and you trust me, and that we know each other and that we learn about each other. And that, you know, sometimes this is, I guess, a broader comment, but I feel like sometimes in other industries, there's this idea of like professional and personal have to be separate. And I don't know that that works in this kind of work. I think there has to be some element of the personal to it. So yeah, so I guess I'm pretty open with building really meaningful and real relationships with people. Like anyone that I work with becomes absorbed into my life forever, not just for that single project or to tell that single story. And
do you find that easier? Oh, sorry, you go on.
No. What was your question?
Well, do you, I mean, because going back to your first point, you said you really, part of your practice, most of your practice is about working within the regional communities, small communities, right? Do you find that is why you take so long to work in a project, is to make sure that those relationships are strong, to make sure you really know the people?
That definitely is part of it, yeah.
Great.
And I think that links back to what I was saying before about the potential for fallout. And generally, I'm not going to be the one that bears the brunt of that. It's going to be other people. So I have a really important responsibility to make sure that I've created a framework that's going to keep everybody safe. And that's my responsibility as the writer. So and so I think like really explicitly talking about like what people want out of telling this story, right? So that we're on the same page. Why do we want to tell this story? Who do we want to tell it for? Like asking those kind of questions is a big part of the early process of research for me. And it is a very, like my research process similarly is very conversational.
Do you record a lot? Do you record a lot of things?
Heaps.
Most of it. Same. I've got heaps of it. Heaps of it.
You just end up with all these like recordings on your phone, and you're like, "What is that from?"
It's really messy. I was working actually. The play that was meant to, I had another play that was meant to premiere that I co-wrote with Kenneth, and it was about the relationship that develops between a masseuse in Perth and his client, who is a coal miner, like a fly-in, fly-out coal miner. And that little idea came from him, my collaborative partner, recording the idea on his phone 4 years ago. So it was really interesting to hear his thoughts 4 years ago and hear what he had actually, wanted or understood the idea to be. And how long these things can ferment, because I think we do live in this culture, especially living in like a big city, where the need to get product out is really, really intense. Like the need to just get it up, and fortunately, during COVID and lockdowns across major cities, we're seeing a development culture, and we're seeing a development culture emerge of all these plays kind of being developed in-house. And then some people say, but there's nowhere for them to go. And I'm thinking, no, we need to instill that development culture for the writer as well. We need to instill that time. Writing for me is all about time. Like it's going back to that beautiful point you said, years, relationships that emerge over years. That's what it's about. It's really, you have to find the relationships within your collaborators first, and that's if they're good people.
Have you read Jade Lilly's book, The Relationship is the Project?
No.
It's like,
would you suggest it to everyone?
Everyone should read it.
Everyone. Okay. Everyone. Because I just have to remind, it's not just us.
Yeah.
You get that feeling?
It's a bit like we're just talking to each other.
It's good.
Which is nice. It's kind of nice to have a conversation. But everyone should read that book. So it's actually a series of chapters written by different people, and all of those people have incredible practices in community arts and cultural development. and Jade then edited the book. But yeah, it's exactly honing in on this idea of that the relationship is actually the project, and how do we nurture that and take care of that, and thinking about the ethics of how we work together and how the work we make. And Fleur Kilpatrick also talks about this, but a play is a workspace, and so how do we take care of that workspace and make sure that it's not toxic, and don't just accept that this is how it's been. Well, no, we're all crafting the future right now. So what future are we going to craft together, and how are we going to invest in that with our choices?
Yeah, and did you say Fleur Kilpatrick? Did you?
Yeah.
It's funny. I do remember saying that about the workplace. That it is a workspace, because essentially a play is never, or a work of theatre is never ever made on its own.
Yeah.
It's never ever made on its own, and it might be thought about on its own, but eventually, the need for dramaturgs and the need for, an ensemble. Do you work with an ensemble, Alicia? Do you work with ensembles a lot in the community? Like, how does it work?
It works really differently for every single project. So everything I make is like, there's no formula at all. They're all very bespoke to that moment, that conversation. And because I don't just make theatre either, or don't exclusively make theatre, I make other sorts of outcomes. The way that it gets there can look very different. So I sometimes yes, I will work with ensembles and use a devised process, not sitting in a room with myself with a laptop. But other times it's very, very different. And sometimes it's 3 people sitting by the river talking over 6 months, and then there's a thing. Like, it can look
that sounds so nice. That's you need that, don't you? But that's one of the benefits of working within the regions, right? I've never done it, but we had planned to tour the play about the mining, the masseuse and the miner. And it was really, we had some things penciled in, and it was really exciting to be able to go to regional arts centres. But I guess, what do you have you worked, in kind of the city context, and if so, why do you prefer the regions?
Yeah, so I've worked a little bit in Adelaide, and most of the work I did in Adelaide was specifically with young people. That has its own attention as well, in terms of working with young people and the stories they want to tell. I think my experiences between the two are very different in terms of how you build trust, and why building trust matters. Because I think sometimes in a city, this is just my experience, obviously, in my experience in an urban context, if there is something that goes wrong, it's quite easy just to never work with that person again. You can just avoid them and work with someone that you do connect with. Whereas in a regional context, you have whoever's there, and so you have to find a way to work with people, but also not to accept bad behaviour. So the relationship you have to build so that you can ask people to grow is quite different. Whereas in a city, it's quite easy, in a really land sort of way, it's quite easy to dispose of people that you don't like.
I was just about to say, I was about to use the word indispensable and dispensable, but I mean, I love that idea. With the regions, it's very much who's there and what skills do they have.
Yeah. And that's why every project's different, because you've got to build with what you've got, right? Like, maybe I don't have any actors, so this particular project can't be live theatre. Maybe it has to be an exhibition outcome. Or maybe over here I've got an amazing singer, so we're going to build something that uses music. So you're always building the work to fit with what's the constraints that are there, which is kind of I love it.
Yeah, and the utilization of skills, right? Like, the utilization of skills is so important as well. Existing skills is really cool when you think about it. Wow.
Yeah, and I feel like you get to bring in some ways, you get to bring in the community even more, maybe, because they're not just a place for story. They're actually, if they want to, and not everyone wants to, but we can create the work for them to be part of in whatever way they want to be, because you're always crafting it in such a bespoke way. And I find that really exciting, sometimes really challenging, of course, but that's sort of why I keep going back to the regions, because yes, there's challenges, but there's also really exciting work that can be made, because you do have to work in this quite specific way.
And I guess because, the title of this interview is the end of it is with who you know. So you've been collaborating with the same people for quite some time in terms of, key collaborators.
Yeah, sort of. Yes. And lots of things get built on to old things, but I also work in communities that are not my own. So there's this thing of being, I don't even know how to explain it properly, but so sometimes when I go into a new community, so I only go in if I'm invited, but if I go into a community and I've been asked to work there and support, whatever project, support, explore a new story, there's always this initial moment where people assume that I'm from Adelaide, and as soon as I explain where I'm from and what my background is, the energy in the room completely shifts. It's this thing of people go, oh, great, you get it, we can trust you. And there's this visible shift in how people talk and their body language as soon as I explain that I'm not from Adelaide. And I always find that super fascinating.
When you say the way people talk, is it kind of, I'm just going to make an assumption in terms of in terms of the Adelaide thing, is it only from the city? So there's
it's a lot of regional people across the country, and I've worked in interstate as well, have a constant experience of the city treating us as though we're stupid, as though we have no skills, and we are just desperate for the content you can bring us from the city. So when people from cities come in, we kind of, there's a little bit of an eye roll sometimes. Oh, here they are again to tell us how shit we are. And it's a dynamic that has to be navigated.
Wow, I'd be very keen to see how that dynamic shifts.
It's such a hard thing to explain to people, because you see it in people's bodies, you see it, even the vocal tone changes. And it's so interesting. And I've had it happen. I've had it happen for years and years now. And so there's also this moment when you're going into a new community, when you're prepping yourself about how you're going to intro so that you can build that bridge in the right way or as quickly as possible. It's interesting.
That is really, really interesting. I mean, I'm definitely the same, you get that same vibe if you're working, when I've worked in rooms with Filipinx performers that from the country or have lived in the country more than, say, someone who's been here 20 years, because the experiences are very politically, very sociologically very different to each other. So there's not as much a tension, but a contrast there, similar to the city and region, kind of thing. We have that exact same kind of issue within the Philippine performances, Filipino, people coming from different provinces in the country. Very, very different if you're from like a big city like Quezon City or Manila compared to a province like Baguio or Pangasinan, where my mother's from. So it's very different. I know what you mean. That body language though, when people shift when they're comfortable, really fascinating. That's what it is, right? It's that shift when you're comfortable.
Wow. And do you find like in terms of working with your community, which is a cultural and in some ways a DNA community, what about like if you're working with people who don't have that shared background, like what does that do? Like, do you work with those collaborators who don't have a shared background?
I do, because for me theatre is a humanist art form, and I think that I always try and bring the education isn't just for the audience; it's for the collaborators as well.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
Like so, yeah. I've worked with different cultures to bring this show to light. Shows to light. A lot of Asian collaborators as well, because there is a shared diasporic experience there. I mean, but each culture is extremely different. I'm going to acknowledge that, and worked with white collaborators as well. But the thing that I guess I'm always aware of when I work with a white collaborator is that I always think, where is the Southeast Asian or Filipino practitioner in this that could be here?
Yeah.
And it stems down to a bit of a systemic and institutional issue within major training institutions where they're not training people of certain cultures up. It's also a bit of a cultural, we talked about earlier in this conversation, the pathways that young people take. I mean, not everyone needs to go to a major school to get jobs. We need to, even the most seasoned community performance or community artists need to continuously engage and seek out and see who's out there, and really, really look, and look for those people with existing skills as well. Because that's really important, because you want to work, you want to, pad the room with all these wonderful people that are from your community. And it's really, I think it's about doing a community call out. I think it's about, encouragement as well. Even if you have a young Filipino guy doing the lights or, ASMing or that sort of thing, that real encouragement.
To meet everyone. So then that creates a network they can join later. Yeah.
Mentoring is very important in that regard as well, because like you said, there is no clear way to this idea of success within the arts. I think everyone can do their own thing and do their own way. Because then that, if they don't do that, that just forms this elitist little bubble that make people feel uncomfortable.
And I think thinking about, like, when we have those instances when we maybe have a bit of power in the room for whatever reason, like, what are we doing to think about what the real barriers are keeping people out? And I always think about my very first experience. So like I said right at the beginning, I was a high school dropout, teenage mom, thought the arts was a waste of time, right? Like, I thought that the arts was totally for other people and not for me. And it was because of really really robust, careful thought by some incredible artists who created a space, not just for me, but for a cohort of young parents. And they really deeply thought about what we needed from an access perspective. And that's different to what a different group of people might have needed. But we were all single parents, so they got the funding to have a creche and childcare. We all had fuel provided, so it was little practical things that enabled us to even be in the room to have the conversation.
That's an extraordinary sense of activism there too, because, you were there forming a community of marginalized people, single parents, right? And someone immediately recognized that is a community in itself, and that needs, because they're everywhere. Communities are just everywhere. And this idea of being an active member in the community, I think, is really at a high point in being debated at the moment, because I don't know what makes you a leader or what makes you a kind of, Gandalf stature, Dumbledore-esque, idea of a leader, or what you need to go through to we become to become one. That's what I think. Like what does it mean to be an active member of the community? Because you talk about, you're in the regional kind of art setting. Everyone has to pull their weight, right? It's a team effort.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there might be people that may be a little hesitant to get out there, that may be unpacking their own issues, and that sort of thing.
And different moments in time, like what am I trying to say here? Sometimes when you're having the thought as you're saying, and you're like, what I'm saying.
I've had 50 of those tonight. It's just,
yeah. But like, yeah, I think it's really like, I think about this a lot actually. Like, what does it mean to be part of my community? What does it mean to contribute to my community? What does it mean to be active in my community? And I think those two things aren't necessarily the same in terms of contribute versus being active. What does it mean to have leadership responsibility versus a leadership position? And what does it mean to be in a relationship with my community? And how does that shift over time, like all relationships do? And how do I navigate that and negotiate that? And what do I need from my community as well? If we're in a relationship, you know, relationship's always two-way. So it's not just about this kind of, you know, oh, I'm here to serve the community and we're going to write some great stories. Like, great, but how do we take care of each other, and how do we navigate the cycles that all relationships have of rupture and repair? And I don't have any answers for that, but those are the questions that I'm always asking myself in doing this work.
And linking back to what we talked about earlier, the rupture and repair is integral because we need to see a community's flaws. Right, we need to see a community. I'd say suffer. Like, I think a community going through hardships for me on stage, or on screen, or audibly or anything like that. It engages me because it gauges a sense of empathy, but it also gauges a sense of, right, this is something I need to know more about.
Yeah.
This is something that I need to be educated on.
Yeah.
This is something that's so important to me.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting, right? Because some people, like, we all engage with whatever content for different reasons. And I think some people do want to go to the theatre and just have an experience and be wowed. Yeah. But that's definitely not what I go for. Like, I go because I want to think about things I haven't thought about before. And ideally, like, I want to feel it. I want to have a big cathartic cry. Like, that's what I'm heading to the theatre for. And I want to think about the world differently, and I want to look at myself and the world differently afterwards. Like, that's what, like, when a show's nailed it, it's done that for me.
Right. Yeah. When a show's really just hit it, it really just kind of gets it. I've had that.
Oh, hit me.
Yeah, I had my experience, the similar experience to you. I had watched a show called Counting and Cracking. Yeah, of course. Yeah, you came to Adelaide.
I didn't get to see it. So and Jay was going to be on this panel, but obviously couldn't get here. But I read so much about it, and so yes, please tell us about it because it sounded amazing.
Well, it was an extraordinary play, obviously, brainchild of Shakti and Belvoir and Co-Curious and all these wonderful organisations, and it deserved all the acclaim that it got. But one of the things I just loved about it was that it obviously put a South Asian culture on stage, but it did it without buckling to a set kind of structure. Like it wasn't it wasn't Western, it was just wonderful. It retained all senses of its community. It retained everything. And therefore, if it retains all senses of a community, the community will come because they'll feel safe. Like, why will they want to see which this wasn't, but why would they want to see some whitewashed play about, anything like that? So the way it was retained was really important because it ensures the fact that people will still be engaged with it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's really important to me when I'm writing, if I'm writing something that is non-fiction, so it's based on real things, that whoever has been part of that conversation sees the work before a wider audience does.
Yes.
So, like, for me, they have to be comfortable with what's going out, and if they're not, I actually have a responsibility to pull it or to change it, because when it is real stories that are present, again, I just feel like there's a really deep responsibility there. It's a bit different when it's a historical story, obviously, but yeah.
And what are you doing? I guess, what are you working on at the moment? What's next for you? You got?
I don't even know. I'm working on too many things at once right now. But I have recently returned to my sort of home community, and by home community, it's the community that I was born in, but I didn't grow up there, but I've lived there 6 times, so I keep going back. So it's very much the community that makes me who I am. And I have returned home for a number of reasons, but one of those is I want to tell more stories there. And so I'm working on a site-specific work, the very early kernels of a site-specific work, exploring my relationship to that community and why I keep going home, even though it's complicated. So
okay, great.
Yeah. What about you? What are you working on?
I've got I actually, you know, when you write something, you just really like it, and you're like, oh, I really like this. I'm really happy with this. Not, you know, it might not be good. It might not be good, but I mean, it might just, it's just good to write it. It feels good to write it. It's a play about an aging Asian man who owns a convenience store, and his relationship with basically no community. He's got none. It's really interesting, but he's pretty much the sole survivor of a small business community, and it's about how much do we care for those people now if they refuse to change. And it's because he's lost everything. And I think that's also really interesting to see dwindling communities on stage, because then I think you're indicting the audience. You're kind of saying, this is your fault. No, it's not what I do, but I mean, like, you know, undoubtedly, if you can force an audience to look at themselves and look at their decisions, then I think that's part of the theatre. And also, you know, get them to have a big cry about why things are like that, the way they are, you know? And that's so important.
I love that. I'm just keeping on the time. We are about to wrap up, but I just wanted to circle back to that idea about success and what success looks like, because it can look like different things, right? So I'm interested in what success looks like for you. Like, what does it mean for you? What do you want it to mean for you? And I guess any words of wisdom for our watching audience on success?
Success for me is if you can turn up to wherever it is you're writing, whether it's a TV writer's room, whether it's a friend's place that you're doing a reading of a play that you've done 50 drafts for, whether it's a major theatre company you're in resident, whether it's an independent arts collective, whether it's writing for a dance or movement collective. If you can turn up and stand your ground and believe in what you've done, but also believe that you are meant to be there because people have asked you to be there, that's success for me. But if you can make sure that you stand your ground, if that you really are prepared to defend your work, is the most important aspect of it. Because if you're defending too hard, that's an assessment of, is this the right place for me? But then if you're defending to a point where you feel passionate about your work, it's very much the right place for you. Because you are the work. And for me, success is literally just being able to turn up and articulate and defend and love your work and love what you're doing. Everyone wants to say, oh, by the time I get to like 30, I want to play on this main stage or whatever. And it's just like, no, if you can balance your life as an artist and you can keep happy and take care of yourself, like in a health perspective as well, I mean, that's success for me. That's inordinate success. That's like in the realms, you know, of, What about you? What's success for you, and what are your words of wisdom? Tell me, because I love that we struck on that, Alicia. That's great.
It's interesting what you just said about like people wanting to get on a main stage, because I so don't feel that. That is not an aspiration that I have at all. And look, if it happens, I'll consider it. Like, I'll consider it. Sorry, that sounded weird. But like, if the offer was there, then you go, okay, what will that mean? Whatever. But it's not something I'm striving towards at all. Because for me, success is about, do I get up in the morning and want to keep doing this work?
Yeah.
Am I living in a way that feels values aligned? So, for me, that thing about the values breach is really, really important. And some of the work, like when I think about the work I most love seeing, It's the weird, quirky stuff in like a little fringe venue that you can't even find that's got 20 people. So if that's the stuff I love, why would I be aiming for a main stage with 500, 1,000 people if that's not even what I love as an audience? So I just kind of go, you know, like, let's think about, I think defining for you, what's exciting for you, and what are the things, like if you're striving for success, thinking through like what are the things that are exciting for you and how do you get there, rather than feeling like you've got to follow this one track because everyone's told you that's the track. And I feel like that's true of everything in life, not just our career, you know, like this idea that, oh, you've got to get married and have kids. Well, no, you don't. Like, you know, maybe that's not what you want. And if that's not what you want, don't do it. And I think we can apply that to our careers too, right? And go, well, what is meaningful for me? What's interesting and exciting? What makes me want to sit down and bring the words out? And then what do I need to do to be able to have more of that? And yeah. And I think, it's probably threaded its way through this conversation, but for me, the measure of success is very much held in those relationships. So do people want to work with me again? Do people trust me? Do people feel like the work that we've made together does represent them? And represents them in a way that is complex and nuanced, not just making them look good.
Surface. Yeah. You want those complex, you know, you want those complexities and nuances, because you don't, you know, you don't want to get outside people writing these stories.
Yeah.
You know, which is just surface, because they can't access the complexities and nuances.
Yeah. And we don't just want to write something that's like a feel good, let's make everyone look good either, because, well, if things aren't working, we want to be able to unpack that so we can do something about it. Like for me, you know, intentions are important, but we've got to back it up with action. And the work sometimes for me about, I guess for me, it sometimes is tied into a bit of accidental activism, maybe, because I certainly don't set out to be an activist, but that thing about how are we building the future we want to live in. And I think our work does that. Or is doing that all the time. It's creating the future. So
and making sure that it's a sustainable future for the next generation of artists.
Yes,
as well.
100%.
A really sustainable future is so important for them.
Yeah. And I think about all that all the time working with young people, right? Anything I'm doing, like the way I operate, would I be okay with a young person that I'm working with operating in this way, or being in a space with others operating in this way? And if I wouldn't be, then I need to adjust what I'm doing, because I'm creating the workplace they're going to inherit, and that they're already entering.
Or the workspace, as Fleur says, you know. But I think that's it.
Yeah, I think we're being wound up. So, thank you so much, Jordan.
I've really enjoyed it. Yeah, it was a pleasure to meet you, and hopefully I'll get to meet you in person.
That would be lovely, and I will look forward to maybe seeing some of your work in the future. I'll keep my eyes peeled.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing an hour with us, everybody. And
thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, National Young Writers Festival. We love you.
We love you very much, and everyone stay safe and stay well.
Yeah. Bye.